Welcome to Mac Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I'm your announcer, Kennedy Galpin. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Catch Land & Sea, upscale dining in Hendersonville.
Thank you, Kennedy, and welcome everyone to Mac Talk. I'm your host, John Pitcher. We like to think of the Mac as a cultural town square where we encourage everyone to be their creative best. Speaking of creativity, Kennedy, I'm excited to announce that our guest today is the renowned Tennessee artist David Wright. And as I understand it, your family has a connection to this great artist. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so we actually do have a connection to him because my grandparents have a historical cabin on their property off of Whites Creek Pike. It was originally owned by Frederick Stump, who came down from Pennsylvania. And I'd like to say it was in late 1700s. He created this house.
Because it's like really a cabin, right?
It's really just,
and I can say that. It's a two-story
cabin. It's pretty small.
Because I am actually looking at a reproduction of a painting of this cabin that David Wright did. So David was working for a magazine?
He was.
And he found out that this Colonel Frederick Stump had built this particular cabin. They located it on property that was then owned by your grandparents. So he came to your grandparents?
He did. He met my grandparents, the Baltzes.
And I guess he wanted to know if he could paint it,
and
right?
And he did. He did. He actually created an extension that was there at the time. This would have been about the 1980s, I would say.
Okay.
The actual reproduction says 1997 because I believe that's maybe whenever they printed it. But by 1997, they had actually remodeled the cabin a little bit to add a new roof because it needed it really badly.
Yeah.
And added an extension out of the back just to add kind of a kitchen area.
And because that's what people do.
I mean, that's what people do.
That's what we did here with Mont Haven.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the house up front, and then we're sitting back here recording in what is essentially an extension from probably built in the 1930s.
Yeah. I mean, and that's exactly what they did. They added an extension to it to kind of make it an extra living space and kind of a guest area.
But how cool is that? Your grandparents had this run-in with the great David Wright,
exactly,
who is the premier painter of the American frontier because, you had a frontier house on your grandparents' property.
Yeah. And the painting that he did, a reproduction of that piece actually still hangs above their couch at their house right now.
Wow.
I can attest to it.
Wow. Okay. That is so amazing. Well, I count your family lucky having a connection like that. I'm not sure David Wright needs any introduction here at Mont Haven since he is one of Tennessee's best known artists, but I'll go ahead and introduce him anyway. David Wright, as I noted, is the premier artist of the American frontier. His paintings depict historical subjects with deeply researched accuracy and detail. David's paintings are now the subject of a beautiful new book titled David Wright, Historian with a Brush. The book showcases some of David's finest paintings of the American frontier and the U.S. Civil War, along with some of his remarkably expressive renderings of American Indians. We are thrilled that David is here to talk with us about his art and his new book. David, welcome to Mac Talk.
Well, it's good to be here. I really appreciate this because of all that Mont Haven has done to support our arts in our community and beyond. It's way beyond. We need it, and you all have done it.
Thank you so much for saying that. I am so excited myself. I have been wanting to have you on this podcast forever, and now we have a good excuse, a good reason, because you have a new book out. And it is a beautiful book, a beautifully laid out coffee table book that showcases so much of your great art. And it just kind of had me wondering for a second, how did you swing getting a book like this? Because I thought that artists had to be dead before they could get something this sensational. In fact, you had to be like Renoir or Rembrandt.
Well, now that you mention it, that has a lot to do with it. At my age, I figured if I'm going to do a book, I better do it now.
Oh, my gosh.
And when Robin Hood of Grandin Hood came to me and suggested, let's publish a book on your art, Jane and I both sat down and said, let's do it now. And we did. And they did a fantastic job with it.
Really? Well, in a way, I also have to say, I think that was a somewhat unfair question on my part because there's no way you could have answered it modestly. I think the reason that you've got this book that might otherwise go to someone like a Renoir or a Matisse is because you really are one of the great artists of your generation. So
I appreciate that. But
that I think is the reason that Grandin Hood has decided to publish your work, and there is definitely a market for it. Tell me, the book is titled "Historian with a Brush." Why that title?
Well, Seth Hopkins, the director of the Booth Western Art Museum, titled the book for me, and Seth's there again, another great art museum down in Cartersville, Georgia. Recommend anybody go to that whenever they can. It's a good one. And Seth wrote parts of the book for me. And when I approached him on it, and we needed a title, and Seth came up with that one, I liked that. It said it, Historian with a Brush. I paint American history, and I do paint with a brush. So it made it work.
Okay. Well, there's another aspect to that as well that I think Seth was probably talking about, and that is, like a historian, you do a lot of research.
Oh, yeah.
On your work. I mean, you are detailed down. I mean, you go into the records. You look at what a particular sword scabbard might look like, or you have a very good idea of what the face paint of an American Indian would be, or what their clothing would look like. Tell us a little bit about that kind of research that you do.
Well, that's pretty extensive. We could be here for days getting into that, of course, but the point of it is I paint American history, my subject, and I've done that now for 50, 60 years. And if you're going to paint it accurately, as I try to, you've got to research it. And how do you research it? Well, back before the computer, books.
Okay.
That was it. And I go to books written by the people who were there and tell me what they went through, what they dressed like, what they did, and try to use that in my paintings to accurately portray a painting as accurately as I can. I find that to be my best way to go about it. And of course, since the computers come along, goodness sakes, it's opened up to a whole new field, and I research all the time. So if you want your paintings, art, to be historically accurate, you've got to research. And I've got books written by the guys who were there, mountain men, frontiersmen, out there, and I utilize them all my life.
I would imagine you have to go to museums as well, and
yeah,
other places to actually see, what these people were wearing. And
you got to do that. And I've been to museums, Scotland, England, Canada, all over the country, photographed clothing and other artifacts too that I've used in my paintings. Here again, if you want to be historically accurate, you've got to research it in all aspects of it, from books to museums to physically doing it. And we could get into me doing it too, which I
probably will be asking you some of that.
Okay, but I won't get into that right now. Okay.
But I think there's another thing that came out in this book. They note that David Wright is also walk the walk and talk the talk, that you actually go on scene, on location. So you know what it looks like.
Well, try to recreate the time period. There again, it adds to the ability to paint the time period. And if you know a little bit of what they went through, and of course I can't go through what those guys went through, but if you've been out there freezing to death and not eating for days, wearing the same clothes that they might have worn, and you get a little bit more insight as to what they might have endured and how I can portray it in a painting.
And I think that's one thing that I think you do convey very well, is you put us there in the scene, which is something that you don't always get the immediacy of in a book, and just from the writing, the description of it. But you put us in that scene, and I think it helps us understand a little bit better what was going through the minds of these people who were from a very, very different time period, and and quite frankly thought very differently than we did.
Well, I try to, and I'll say this right up front. I've made my mistakes through the years, especially earlier on. But my saying is, what I think set in stone tomorrow something will surface that changes that. Right. And it has through the years. Things change when you wind up research and research and research. What you think is set in stone today may be changed tomorrow by some new research that comes on board. But then again, I try to portray it as accurately as I can. Hopefully I have.
Okay. One of the contributors to this book, there are some people who've done some writing, is James Crutchfield, who is a historian. And it's a fabulous essay. It sort of goes into your long biography. And let me ask you, you were sort of a country boy from Kentucky when you started off. How did you learn how to become such a master painter and artist? What's your background in that?
That's a pretty broad term, master painter, but still.
Well, anyone just has, all they have to do is open up the book and look at one painting, just pick one randomly, and they'll know what I'm talking about.
I don't, but still, my interest in art goes back to my childhood because I can remember my mom drawing pictures for me when I was 3 and 4 years old when we lived in Louisville. You know, I was born in a house in Rosine, Kentucky, a little country town, moved to Louisville during the war, and 14 of us lived in one house together, the whole family, cousins, everybody moved up there. And she would draw pictures of us for us in the evening in her lap, a pencil drawing of a Gordon's potato chip truck and a horse. Those are the two I can remember. And that, I think, is what started my real interest in art, that point there. And then I've been drawing all my life, ever since.
Well, one of the things that we see are some sketches you made. I believe you might have been in grade school and high school of the Civil War. So you were already had a kind of an interest in it. And obviously you had a talent for it. I mean, they look amazing. But what was because you must have done more than just sketch out. I mean, you've had a formal education, right? And you went to college. You did
not a college, an art school.
You went to tour.
School,
went to tour in Europe. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, because how does one learn to draw the human figure the way you did? Because that is a challenge.
Well, let me get into that. But before I do that, my interest in history goes back to my childhood. It really does. This little country town in Kentucky was full of family history, what happened there. And my older brother, he owned a real muzzle-loading gun, played cowboys and Indians with it, where I had a cap pistol.
Okay.
And so there's where we go back to. So that's where my interest in drawing historical subjects, especially Civil War. When we moved to Tennessee from Pennsylvania, we moved up there after the war. We became little Confederates because, boy, the history was just full here, and we lived it.
And you came here, what was it, about 1952?
52.
We moved to Goodlettsville.
Yeah, we moved to Goodlettsville, Tennessee.
So the Battle of Nashville.
And
all of
Franklin.
The deep history here.
So we really embedded a love for the Civil War history here, and it goes back even further than that. We live here in Sumner County, and buddy, we've got more history here, the Indian Wars and all of the settlers, than lots of other states have. So all of that's embedded in my upbringing, and that's what I paint, American history. Now, art school, when I got out of high school, I'll say this to you, we took a first test ever administered for what we were going to do after high school, and I scored 50-50, veterinarian or artist.
Wow, so you could have gone either way, right?
Well, if I'd become a veterinarian, I might have made a lot of money. But still, I chose art school. Went to Harris School of Advertising Art in Nashville to become an advertising artist for 2 years. Studied in Italy, came back and became an advertising artist for about 6-7 years. Worked for an advertising agency, and then started my own studio. But the whole time I was painting, doing fine art too. And then eventually worked out of the advertising field in the mid-'70s and became a full-time artist painting pictures.
Okay. We're speaking with Tennessee artist David Wright. We'll be back after this important message.
Catch Land to Sea is proud to support arts education through its partnership with the MAC. Located in the heart of Hendersonville, Catch Land and Sea is an upscale dining destination where premium seafood and expertly crafted meats take center stage. Through its partnership with the MAC, Catch Land and Sea helps give students the tools, training, and inspiration they need to pursue their passions. Creativity thrives here. Learn more at catchlandandsea.com.
We're back with Tennessee artist David Wright, whose new book is called Historian with a Brush. One of the things that I really like about the new book is that I feel almost when I'm flipping through the pages that I'm actually walking through a place like the Booth Western Art Museum, because we have these different galleries in the book. That's how it's laid out. It's very, very nicely done. There is a big section on the American frontier. There's a section on the American Indian. There's a section on the Civil War. In the very back, we have some really amazing and lovely and expressive landscapes. just for starters, you mentioned an interest in history. Why specifically the American frontier? What was so interesting about that to you? Because that really is, I think, very central, certainly to where we're sitting right now in Sumner County, Tennessee, which formerly North Carolina, because at one time this really was a gateway to the West, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, let me recount that as briefly as I can. When I started painting part-time, I was still an advertising artist. I painted landscapes to make a living. I mean, you do a show, nobody's interested in American history paintings then. So I did landscapes. Well, I have all my life. And then in 1976, the 200th celebration of America, I did a mountain man drawing. Printed 50 of those and took them to Friendship, Indiana, and traded and sold all 50 of them in 2 days. And I thought, hey, this is where I need to be going rather than landscapes.
You're discovering a market.
Yeah, I did. And of course, I love doing that. So that's what started my ability to start marketing and painting American history subjects. I've always done it, but not professionally, in that sense. Landscapes I started out, then I worked into doing American history in 76 and have ever since then.
Right. Well, I think one thing I saw in the book was an interesting fact that, of course, you had this oil boom in the 70s in the West.
Yeah, boy.
So all of a sudden you've got these guys who are living in the West who now have some money and they want some Western art.
Well, in 73, I started Greystone Press to market my prints. And here again, they were landscapes.
Right.
And my brother Joe ran the Greystone Press. When the oil boom hit, those guys stepped up and started buying paintings unbelievably, originals. And by then I was starting to do, 74, 75, 76, somewhere in that time period, I was doing American history. And that's what spurred my, I guess, moving over to American history painting-wise, because I was with the gallery, Alderman Gallery in Texas at that time, and they started selling my paintings of American mountain men a lot bigger and a lot faster than landscapes.
And what interested you, because there are so many of those, what interested you specifically in doing these mountain men? Because you have trappers, you have certainly Lewis and Clark in your book, you have Daniel Boone. What interested you in that specific group of Americans who are real, pioneers and trendsetters?
Well, there again, that gets pretty involved because, when I worked for the newspaper after I got out of art school, the American Civil War 100th anniversary was going on.
Okay.
And in 63, 62.
And is this the Nashville Banner?
Yeah, Nashville
It was
Banner. Every year.
Nashville's PM newspaper at the time.
Every year they did a segment on the Battle of Nashville, 1 year what happened. Well, the Civil War, but 64 was the Battle of Nashville, and I did that painting because I love doing Civil War paintings, and you saw the drawing in the book, when I was in, 8th grade,
yeah.
I did a Civil War
and it
drawing.
was good.
Well, okay, they were okay. But the point is, my interest in Civil War was very evident at that point, and I did that painting, and boy, I thought, this is it, I'm going home. But I got drafted the next month, and so did 2 years in the Army. But anyway, coming back to that, all of my work and that oil boom you just mentioned prompted the Western art galleries to start selling Western art, and that motivated me to start doing for Western frontier art, mountain men. And these are things, again, I've got into and have been doing for years, personally. So I was doing what I love to do there.
Was this something that also maybe was an interest you'd had when you were a kid? Because I think I might have seen an old photo or two of you in a coonskin cap as a kid.
Yeah, my brother Don and I had a coonskin cap when I was, 6 years old?
Right.
Long before Davy Crockett was ever on television, and I still have it too.
All right. So it was something that was already kind of interesting to you. Well, here's like a technical or process kind of question for you. But as I was going through the book and looking at the different people that you have painted, often sometimes they are historical figures, American Indians. They tend to be very, very good looking. I've noticed there are not a lot of ugly people in a David Wright painting. I think there's this one American Indian woman, is her name Sacagawea? Am I saying her right?
Yeah.
She's with William Clark. And another one, if I'm getting her name right, I think she was Cherokee, Anawaki Clinch.
Anawaki Clinch.
Very, very, I mean, I'm taking that maybe, I'm taking either one of two ways, either that people in the 19th century were much more beautiful than people today, or you are finding models who just look the part for you. How does this work?
Well, Sacagawea was Cherokee. I mean, not Sacagawea. I mean, the model was Cherokee.
Right.
She was from North Carolina, and she was pretty. And of course, I'm going to paint a pretty Indian woman rather than an ugly Indian woman. Why not? And Anawaki Clinch is Cherokee too, and she, there again, is a very pretty young Indian woman, and she has a lot of history tied to her Cherokee history. So.
But you're painting from models, oftentimes, right?
That model for
to
me
give you sort of something to go on, but obviously, I just couldn't help but notice that these are strikingly not just attractive people, but strikingly beautiful people in some instance.
Well, why not? Bill Golden introduced me to Karen McCutcheon, who modeled for me when she came here to see him play here in Nashville. And he called me and said, "Hey, man, I got a good-looking Indian woman down here who might make a great model." And I went down and met Karen, and by golly, she modeled for me, and I painted her.
And speaking of good-looking people, we have William Lee Golden as a mountain man.
Yeah,
in one of these. There are some people who actually look like country music stars.
Yeah,
and yet they're in mountain men costumes.
Painted him, in 82? And we did Mountain Man stuff in the wilderness together. He got into it pretty heavily there for a while.
Well,
had the clothing made and did it. We went out there and camped together and had a good time doing it. He's a good man. I like William Lee. Good singer, too.
Yeah. I found that fascinating. So, and of course, I think when you came back from the war, you did some modeling, right? So you have a feeling for this.
Yeah, I did. I went to work for Bunton Advertising Agency for a couple years, and we did various campaigns for clothing, Washington, D.C. clothing, and they introduced a new line of men's clothing, and I wound up modeling for them for a while. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, where do you find, and how do you pick models for? I mean, I'm being a little facetious in saying they're all gorgeous people, but there must be some people who just seem to be very art-worthy and who inspire you to draw.
Well, you got to sell whatever you're doing if you want to make a living, right?
Right.
And people are more inclined to, to be attracted to better-looking people than ugly people.
Okay.
Not to say that every Indian was not a pretty person, but you research this, and mountain men who married Indian women commented on how pretty they were. Several of them. I've read this.
Well,
and what's the attraction?
Well, the frontier men that you've painted are also very classically attractive too. They could be in an advertising.
Why not?
Why not? Okay. We're speaking with Tennessee artist David Wright. We'll be back after this important message.
Catch Land & Sea proudly advances arts education through its collaboration with the MAC. Nestled in the heart of Hendersonville, Catch Land & Sea offers an elevated dining experience featuring the outstanding seafood and skillfully crafted meats. Through its support of the MAC, Catch Land & Sea helps equip young artists with the skills, confidence, and inspiration to follow their creative dreams. Creativity lives here. Visit catchlandandsea.com.
We're back with Tennessee artist David Wright, whose new book is called Historian with a Brush. I have to ask you if you have a favorite Western frontier painting, and I'm gonna, and I think you maybe mentioned one or two to me earlier, but I have to mention the one that's on the dust cover, which is Daniel Boone leading the settlers through the Cumberland Gap in 1775. What is striking to me about that art, did you pick that art, by the way, for the dust cover, or was that the publisher? If I were the publisher, I would have picked that one.
Yeah, I picked that one. A good background on that particular painting, and it goes back to about 2000. Gary Foreman, who was a producer of films, documentaries primarily, got to do a film for Cumberland Gap National Park, and that's when I was commissioned by the park to do that painting of Daniel Boone coming through the Cumberland Gap Park. So I did that one because of that subject matter and that history behind it, and it wound up, being a big mural in the park, in the visitor center there now too. Then, of course, they did the documentary, and they show it at the park and the visitor center as well. So that painting has a lot of history to it. Right. As everybody is very aware of what Daniel Boone did, settling Kentucky and all of the things.
Right. And of course, what's so amazing about just when that event is taking place, it's 1775. So we are still a colony. Mm-hmm. We are fretting with Britain over what we're going to be. But Daniel Boone is already striking out with these people to move west. And that history is recounted just in that one painting. And there are two things about that painting that really, or maybe three things about that painting that really struck me. And people will see it. One is just the use of light, because they're going through the woods, and there is light coming through the tree canopy, and it is just striking. It's almost like it's illuminating a path for them as they walk forward. Second thing that's really striking to me is just the look of determination on the faces of all those people, which I would imagine, to me, just really captures their personality. You would have to have a lot of determination to
well,
do
he did,
that.
And of course the history of that, I think there were 30, 35 people in that excursion that he did, and of course he had to turn back after that. And when I did the painting, commissioned to do the painting, I went over to Cumberland Gap. Now the highway that was going over the gap was being torn up, and they were replacing it as is now the Wilderness Road. And so I walked up there, the park ranger, she took me up there, and we were walking up, got up to the top, and I turned around. And today, the difference being the trees today are not the trees that were there 200 years ago, obviously. But I could see through an opening, I could see Tennessee hills, which is just south of there, of course. And so in the painting, I decided I'm going to put that in there. So if you look at the painting, you'll see a little opening in the trees and just real faint hills in the beyond, and that's Tennessee. And I wanted to put that in the painting. Whether or not you could see that in 1775, I doubt, because the trees are a lot bigger then than they are now. But I wanted to put that in there. The sunlight coming down is symbolic, obviously. That you can relate to why that would be in there with that group of settlers coming across.
It's striking.
Like that.
The way you have reproduced it is striking. And also, you see this in that particular painting and in others, a number of your other paintings. There's one called, I think, Beyond the Settlement, where you have riders on horseback getting ready to cross a stream. But there are a lot of dogs in your paintings with these frontiers people. And I have a hound dog, and I was just thinking, I think my dog would much rather have been back then, riding alongside a horse and going across a stream than being stuck in a suburban house, which is what he's got today.
That's very well documented. Yeah, dogs are always documented. And I've done rides in the Rocky Mountains, replicating mountain man rides out there in the time period, and we took dogs with us on those rides too. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And they play a part.
Yeah, they do. But they're very, very. Their curiosity, their energy is definitely conveyed in your paintings, and so that's something that really struck me.
Well, we go beyond that. Research it and find out how many times these little groups of settlers were forewarned by dogs of Indians about to attack them in camps.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it shows up. It does.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Indians, because there is a fabulous gallery in your book on the Indians. And, you portray them with in beautiful color in their clothing. Many of them have face paint and other kinds of jewelry or piercings. They have tools, they have weapons. A lot of these people are coming from a culture that's more oral. How did you do the research to get that much exquisite and beautiful detail?
Well, there again, go back to artwork done during the period by people who were there. And I use that. There's not a lot of it, but I definitely go there and look it up as much as I can. Today on the computer, back in the old days in books. But beyond that, I've been to museums and photographed Indian clothing, Indian collections and stuff. And like I said, in the United States, Canada, Scotland, England. Never been to Europe yet, but that's what I do. And then you get those original pieces that are documented to have been there at that time, and that worked. Okay. I put them in there, and I found out some really interesting stuff about some of those pieces historically that we don't see today, in the short little blurb in the museum, the documentation behind them. Really interesting stuff.
Right. Mm-hmm. It also probably didn't hurt that you were an advisor for the film Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah.
So you actually got to meet somebody, and I'm probably going to say his name wrong, but it's Wes, is it Studi?
Wes Studi, yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about, he absolutely gorgeous man. Tell me a little bit about him and what he did in the movie and your painting of him.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good one. And I still, Wes and I still stay in touch today. He's been to the house a couple times, but that was one of my better accomplishments in my life, is when I got to meet Wes when we worked on Last of the Mohicans. And I'll relate this real quick. I was just an extra in the film, and an extra is right at the bottom of the heap, really. But I went over there to meet him when I found out he was going to be in it, because he looks the Indian part to me. That's what it's all about. So I worked a week. Last night we worked all night together on a set. And let me say this about him. He stayed in character the whole time. I'm not kidding you. That we'd be standing there off the set, and he'd still be Magua, and I wouldn't talk to him. But when it was over, broke down, and I walked up to him, and I said, "Hey, I'm an artist. I'd like to photograph you and paint you. Can I do that?" He said, "Sure, come on back to this trailer." And I went back over and photographed him, and that's how we met, and we've been friends ever since. And I've painted him, I don't know how many times since then.
Wow. Yeah. What was your attraction to American Indians? Because you do a lot of it. Why did you decide to go in that direction?
American Indians?
Yeah, why did you decide to paint?
Well, I've always been attracted or drawn to our history of American Indians and the part they played in it and in our history, and so why not? They're good people to paint. They got the clothing, they got the background, they got the history, and I've painted them as much as I've painted mountain men and frontiersmen, ever since.
We're speaking with Tennessee artist David Wright. We'll be back after this important message.
Catchland to Sea is proud to support arts education through its partnership with the MAC. Located in the heart of Hendersonville, Catchland and Sea is an upscale dining destination where premium seafood and expertly crafted meats take center stage. Through its partnership with the MAC, Catchland and Sea helps give students the tools, training, and inspiration they need to pursue their passions. Creativity thrives here. Learn more at catchlandandsea.com.
We're back with Tennessee artist David Wright, whose new book is called Historian with a Brush. Well, you also have a wonderful gallery on the Civil War. And before I ask you a little bit about that, I have to note you referenced this. You were drafted in, I believe, 1964?
January 1964,
and
23rd of January.
You actually went into the Army, and then, being young and immortal, you actually volunteered to go overseas. Let me ask you, did the being a U.S. Army soldier and actually being, in an active duty role, has that influenced you and your thinking as an artist when you go and you paint something from the Civil War? You were in this same tradition.
Well, not necessarily Civil War, but let me say this. I was drafted and sent to Fort Gordon, and my MOS is an artist, and I was down there doing training age programs for them. Guy walked in our barracks one night with a duffel bag. He said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Vietnam." I said, "Where's that?" Never heard of it, right? This is in October. And he told me what it was. He said, "They're shooting at you over there." I said, "Well, if I'm going to be a soldier, why don't I do that?" So I went down and volunteered, and by December I was gone. I went to Vietnam for a year.
Yeah, 1965, you were all over there.
So I was over from December 64 through 65, came home. But the whole time I was over there, I drew pictures, of ARVNs and American soldiers, mostly ARVNs, Vietnamese military soldiers, Army of Military Vietnam. But I drew the whole time I was over there. So I have those drawings I brought back home with me, and some paintings too. So during that time, even though I was an advisor to the Montagnard and the MACV, I was still drawing.
And
Still an artist.
the Montagnard are the mountain people of
Yeah, Montagnards are mountain people. That's French for mountain people. Yeah.
Right. Well, and one of the reasons I ask you that is that in 2021 you had a fabulous show here with Chuck Creasy. The watercolor is called Vietnam: Two Soldiers, Two Artists, Two Journeys Then and Now. We saw the art that you did, the sketches you did of U.S. soldiers who were there. Also, the people of Vietnam, some of the landscapes. And I can see some similarities with the way you then later came back and drew some of these Civil War generals and soldiers. Obviously, I think you make a point of doing portraits of the people as opposed to battle portraits. Is that something that is this something that has influenced you from just your own being in the Army?
Well, to briefly cover that, when I went with Greystone Press, and Joe, in the 70s, Don Troiani was starting to paint Civil War scenes, and boy, they took off. And Joe came to me and says, do Civil War scenes. I said, I'm not painting any battle scenes. I've been there, done that, and I'm not going to do that. Yeah. But in the 90s, he kept on me all those years, do some Civil War scenes. So in the 90s, I said, I'll agree to paint Civil War, but I'll paint the people. I'm not going to paint battle scenes, and I didn't. I did that in the 60s, back before I endured that. But I did those, and I did, 8 or 10 of them. I don't know how many there were before I got back into huge demand to do my frontier art, selling real well. So I haven't done any Civil War in quite a while. But there again, that whole history of my interest in Civil War emerged, and it was fun to do. I really enjoyed doing it. But I'm back to doing American history frontier period now. Have been now for 20, 30 years since that. And that worked into it. I didn't quit doing frontier. I just added those to it.
Okay. So, you focus on, I think, the Confederates. You don't do the Yankees. What is your interest in the Southern Army, and why do you only do those guys?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, when we moved from Pennsylvania to Tennessee, my brother and I were little Confederates. Okay. Well, we went to Franklin Battlefield. We went to the museum downtown, and we became little Confederates. So my focus was on Confederate, not Yankee stuff. That was Northern stuff.
Yeah.
So when I painted, I was going to paint Confederates, and I did, both officers as well as regular, enlisted men too. And they're mostly all portraits. Robert E. Lee has got soldiers marching behind him and a cannon firing, but there's no dead bodies in my opinion. Not going to be.
Right. That. Fascinating. Well, one of the ones that, and I mentioned this to you earlier, one of the ones that I found to be fascinating, and I just loved it, was a portrait you did of Stonewall Jackson. He's sitting on one of these, wooden fences. He is holding a pair of eyeglasses. He's sitting in the snow. And I just was wondering if you could comment a little bit about painting a scene like that, because when I see it, I showed that to my wife this morning and said, can you just imagine the virtuosity in this painting? I mean, just painting a pair of eyeglasses that are so perfect, you feel like you're looking at a Polaroid photo, and snow, and which has got to be a challenge for an ordinary person to want to. You're not an ordinary artist, but I mean, every aspect of that painting is really spectacular and took a lot of technique. I was just wondering if you could maybe comment about how you do that, and how does one come up with something like this?
Well, Thomas Jackson, one of my favorite generals, obviously, of most everybody, what he accomplished. Had he not been killed, who knows what the outcome would have been. But that painting, when I wanted to do that, Jane and I drove over there, and one little battle that took place up in Northern Virginia that I focused on, and that's where that painting is taking place. And we traveled that whole route that they retreated from or advanced out of after the battle was over, and that site is one of the houses that was on that route in the background. And that's in February, I believe it is, or whatever. There was snow on the ground. I took all of that historical research to put that in there and painted him on that fence watching his men go by. And that's the fun part of doing it, is the research of it. But finding and putting them into place, where they can, makes it even hopefully better for everybody who views it. You saw it, and you saw the snow on the ground. And they mentioned, in the documents that it snowed, and they went through that. And he's sitting there on that fence with his little knife sitting in there that he talked about and wrote about
And you found his hat.
Well, his cap,
his officer's cap. Yeah, you
his
actually,
forge cap.
and we actually see a picture of it, but you actually have reproduced it beautifully in the painting.
Yeah, it's in the museum over in Virginia. Yeah, had to include that in there.
Oh yeah. I had mentioned to you that my family has deep roots in Virginia, and I grew up in the Northern Virginia area, so I can't tell you how many times I was visited Manassas and toured all those sites. So that particular painting just brought back a lot of memories for me in terms of just the area. It definitely resonated. You had mentioned another painting that, in terms of virtuosity, that struck you. I think it's a painting of Davy Crockett, you said?
Yeah, David Crockett.
Tell me a little bit about that and his music making.
Well, we're all Davy Crockett fans ever since Fess Parker came out.
Who you've met, by the way, right?
Huh?
You've met Fess Parker.
Yeah, I met Fess Parker. But that painting of Crockett goes way back for me at the Alamo when he was killed. Susanna Dickinson wrote in her documents afterwards that he played the fiddle at the Alamo. Now, how many people know that David Crockett played the fiddle? Probably very few, right? But that's what motivated me all the way back in 1990 to do that painting. And I didn't get it done till 5 years ago. And it's about a 60-inch painting. But it took me that long before I got around. That one and Kings Mountain are the two big paintings I've always wanted to do. I still hadn't done Kings Mountain yet. Started on
okay,
it.
Okay, you got to get that done.
But anyway,
I won't keep you too much longer because you got to go back and do that.
But things picked up for me, and I had commissions to do and other things, to do. But so those two paintings got on hold. But I finally did Crockett playing the fiddle at the Alamo. And that historical event is one that just people don't, I think, relate to as far as the Battle of the Alamo went, And
really?
So I wanted to show that.
Well, and which you show beautifully, but again, the thing that strikes me, as someone looking at the book and looking at your art is just the sheer virtuosity of it, because, he's playing the fiddle in the fire, by the firelight, and there is this warm golden glow of the fire.
Yeah,
on
people
him.
dancing
and
in the background.
That is just so beautifully done.
That related,
I don't think a photo could capture the mood as well as you do in the painting.
Well, all the films done on the Alamo probably could portray that, but still, that night
it doesn't. But a film would never quite capture the warmth of the fire the way you do.
Well, what motivated me to do that event, him playing the fiddle that night, was that day. Those 38 of them, I think, came in with the news. There's 600 more on their way, I believe it was. I may have the numbers wrong, but that had to elevate their whole outlook on what may take place. Right. Of course, they didn't show up. The 600 didn't, or the extras didn't come. So that's what motivated me to do the painting of him playing the fiddle that night with them dancing in the background. Dancing in Alamo during the siege? No. But if they ever had, that night would have probably been one elevated time that they would have looked upward and hopefully good, And so that's what I was trying to convey in the painting.
Right. Well, you do a lot of work on historical subjects, but you also, in the back of this book, have some amazingly beautiful landscapes. And tell me a little bit about those works. I mean, are these like works that you because they're incredibly detailed, some of them. I mean, I feel like you've gone and painted every single leaf that would have been on a tree over a creek somewhere, every twig. Are you working from photographs? Are you doing these plein air? How do you recreate with such spectacular detail these kinds of landscapes?
Well, I don't know how to answer that. I paint from photographs. I make photographs, I have all my life. And when I go out west and I do Mountain Man trips, recreating the time period, I photograph it if I can. And I've always painted from photographs, that relation to mine. So when I do a painting, set up models, I photograph them, and then work from that. Doing it out of my head, I do some things too, but I do better from photographs.
Okay. Well, there's so much lovely detail. Well, maybe one last question, and I appreciate you giving us so much time. Tell me, what in this book, what about this book are you most proud of?
Well, I guess I'm most proud of the fact that Grandin Hood did such a great job on producing it. Jim Crutchfield, acknowledged award-winning writer, agreed to write it for me, did a fine job. Jeff Carroll laid it out, did a fine job. Robin Hood published it, marketed it, did a fine job. What more could you ask for if you're going to do a book? Had I done the book, how would it have turned out? So I'm tickled with that.
Right.
And now we've got a book of my life, and so we'll see where it goes.
Right. And Grandin Hood, they are the premier publisher of these kinds of works, so it really is a spectacular piece.
Robin's published, 70, 90 books in his life?
And he is.
Award-winning.
And Robin is himself a Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer.
Pulitzer Prize-winning award photographer.
So they know how to put this together.
Vietnam vet, too, by the way.
Yeah, so it's absolutely stupendous. Well, I know we can purchase it at davidwrightart.com.
Yes.
So that's where people should go. Well, okay. Well, David Wright, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it. It's been a good conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Mac Talk from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center. Our mission is to educate, elevate, and encourage our community through the transformative power of the arts. If you are interested in transforming your creative life, check out our website at monthavenarts.org. Our guest today was the renowned Tennessee artist David Wright, whose paintings are the subject of a new book titled David Wright, Historian with a Brush. You can purchase the book at davidwrightart.com. Our podcast music was written by Nashville composer Christina Spinay. I'm Kennedy Galpin. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.